The Upanishads, translated by F. Max Muller, Part 2. Maitrayana Brahmana Upanishad, 3rd Prapataka. The Valakilyas said to Pragapata Kratu, O saint, if thou thus showest the greatness of that self, then who is that other, different one, also called self, who really overcome by bright and dark fruits of action, enters on a good or bad birth, downward or upward is his course, and overcome by the pairs, distinction between hot and cold, pleasure and pain, and so on. He roams about. Pragapata Kratu replied, there is indeed that other, different one, called the elemental self, Buddha Dhamma, who overcome by bright and dark fruits of action, enters on a good or bad birth, downward or upward is his course, and overcome by the pairs he roams about, and this is his explanation. The 5 tanmatras, sound, touch, form, taste, smell, are called bhuta. Also, the 5 mahabhutas, gross elements, are called bhuta. Then, the aggregate of all these is called sarira, body. And lastly, he of whom it was said that he dwelt in the body, he is called Bhutatma, the elemental self. Thus, his immortal self is like a drop of water on a lotus leaf, and he himself is overcome by the qualities of nature. Then, because he is thus overcome, he becomes bewildered, and because he is bewildered, he saw not the Creator, the Holy Lord, abiding within himself, carried along by the waves of the qualities, darkened in his imaginations, unstable, fickle, crippled, full of desires, vacillating, he enters into belief, believing, I am he, this is mine. He binds his self by his self, as a bird with a net, and overcome afterwards by the fruits of what he has done. He enters on a good and bad birth, downward or upward is his course, and overcome by the pairs he roams about. They asked, which is it? And he answered them, this also has elsewhere been said, he who acts is the elemental self. He who causes to act by means of the organs is the inner man. Ana Purusha. Now as even a ball of iron, pervaded, overcome by fire and hammered by smiths, becomes manifold, assumes different forms such as crooked, round, large, small. Thus the elemental self, pervaded, overcome by the inner man, and hammered by the qualities, becomes manifold. And the 4 tribes, mammals, birds, and so on, the 14 worlds, Pur, and so on. And with the number of beings multiplied 84 times, all this appears as manifoldness. And those multiplied things are impelled by man, Purusha, as the wheel by the potter. And as when the ball of iron is hammered, the fire is not overcome, so the inner man is not overcome, but the elemental self is overcome, because it has united itself with the elements. And it has been said elsewhere, this body produced from marriage and endowed with growth, in darkness, came forth by the urinary passage, was built up with bones, daubed with flesh, thatched with skin, filled with ordure, urine, bile, slime, marrow, fat, oil, and many impurities beside, like a treasury full of treasures. And it has been said elsewhere, bewilderment, fear, grief, sleep, sloth, carelessness, decay, sorrow, hunger, thirst, niggardliness, wrath, infidelity, ignorance, envy, cruelty, folly, shamelessness, meanness, pride, changeability. These are the results of the quality of darkness. Tama. Inward thirst, fondness, passion, covetousness, unkindness, love, hatred, deceit, jealousy, vain, restlessness, fickleness, unstableness, emulation, greed, patronizing of friends, family pride, aversion to disagreeable objects, devotion to agreeable objects, whispering, prodigality. These are the results of the quality of passion. Ragas. By these, he is filled, by these he is overcome. And therefore, this elemental self assumes manifold forms. Yes, manifold forms. And the whispering prodigality, the manuscript reads Matasvaro. Oh, that's just the whispering, never mind. The fickleness, kalatvam, deceit, vyav artatvam, tamah. The manuscript reads tamasanvitaeh, and afterwards ragasanvitaeh. Also trishna instead of anastrishna. And changeability. The manuscript reads asatvam, possibly for asatvam, and meanness. Instead of nira krititvam, the manuscript reads nikritatvam, which is decidedly preferable. We may take it to mean either meanness as opposed to udva tatvam, overbearing or knavery, the usual meaning of nikrete. The manuscript in place the translated cruelty in verse 5 here. We have va'ika runyam. And verse 4 reminds us that things aren't quite as they were initially presumed. When we become distinct as a human being in the womb, the bones get formed, and then we have the flesh built up around it. In the West, we assume the opposite. I mean, by the West, those who didn't accept the Quran, and those who didn't accept the Vedas. But yeah, our impurities, well, unless we're seeking to be defiled or something like that, or being careless or something like this, they're actually not this, thing to disparage. Obviously you want to process things and get rid of things and all that. Treasury full of treasures. Therefore should wise people not identify their true self with the body. The manuscript reads vasunete. And oil, verse 4, the manuscript adds snayu after vasa. Instead of maya'eh, reads mala'eh. This reading, mala'eh, would seem preferable, though manus, uroga, yatanam, might be quoted in support of maya'eh. The exact meaning of vasa is given in the Aryavid Yasudak Ara, page 8259. And just because it's said differently in the different texts doesn't mean that, what we read isn't what's supposed to be. Because, as we've seen, the way of speaking of the ultimate God has shifted its titles as we've read this book and turned to different Upanishads. Endowed with growth, instead of some vrid vyupetam, the manuscript reads some vid vyapetam. And has been said elsewhere. Part of this passage has been for the mind of the author of the Manava Dharma Sastra when writing 76 and 77 as this thunam sna utam mam sa sun it telepanam karma vanadam durgande purnam mutra purishayo gara sokasama vishtam roga yatanam aturam ragas valam anityam ka bhuta vasam imam tyagat. The same verses occur in the Mahabharata 12,463 to 12,464, only with tyaga at the end instead of tyaget. The rendering of asthibis kitam by asthithunam shows that kita was understood to mean piled or built up, i.e. supported by bones. And with verse 3, by the means of the organs, the manuscript has anta karana'eh, the manifold assumes different forms such as crooked, round, large, small. See the commentary on page 48, 57. Becomes manifold. The manuscript reads Upete atharegunam katurgalam, multiplied 84 times. You know, the reference to the wheel of 84 in Ekankar. That's where that sort of thing comes from. The manuscript reads Katurasitil aksha. Now, the manuscript reads Katura Sitila Ksheyo Niparin Atam. See also Anubhute Prakasa, verse 118, and in verse 2, this is mine, the manuscript reads Aham so mamadam. And the other note, you know, is at some point I may go back and edit these things. Also in verse 2, then, because he's thus overcome, the manuscript reads Atto, and the commentator explains Atto by Atah Karanat, adding Sandih Kandasa, and the lotus leaf. It sticks to it, yet can easily run off it again. The qualities, see 630. The immortal self, the manuscript reads Athaste Tasya Bindur Eva. Sarira, body. The commentator distinguishes between Linga Sarira, consisting of pranas, Indriyas, the Antahkarana, and the Sukshma Bhutas, and the Stula Sarira, consisting of the 5 Mahabhutas, the 5 Tanmatras, the manuscript reads Tan Matrane. The aggregate, the manuscript reads Tasham Samudayas Takkariram. And indeed, that other different one, the manuscript reads Avara. He roams about. The manuscript adds at the end Pare Brahmatite Katama Eshatite Tan Hovakete, and leaves it out at the end of verse 2. And further in verse 1, downward or upward is his course. The manuscript reads here and afterwards Avakam urdvam vagate dvandvae. And further in verse 1, also called the self, the pure self, called Atma Brahma Kinmatram Prajna Nagdanam, and so on, after entering what he had himself created and no longer distinguishing himself from the created things, Bhuta is called Bhutatma. And the manuscript. Oh. Okay, that's it with the notes for that.